A 16-year-old boy walks across a bridge in the Bronx. He is accused of stealing a backpack. Bail is set at $3,000. His family cannot pay, so the city puts him on an island. 3 years later he walks back off that island, but the person who crossed that bridge never really came back. The trauma had already destroyed him from the inside. And 2 years after his release, Kalief Browder was dead. He was never convicted of a crime. He was never tried. He never stood before a jury. He was simply poor. And in New York City, being poor and accused means one place: Rikers Island. The island sits in the East River, politically in the Bronx, accessible only by a single bridge. 413 acres. 10 jail facilities. At its worst, 20,000 human beings packed into a space designed to hold a fraction of that number. According to court-appointed federal monitors and decades of investigative reporting, what happens inside those walls has been called, in legal filings and official government reports, unconstitutional, brutal, a human rights crisis. But how did it get this bad? How does a jail, not even a prison, a jail meant for people awaiting trial, become one of the most dangerous and violent detention complexes in the entire United States? The answer starts nearly a century ago. And it involves overcrowding, riots, cover-ups, corruption, a crack epidemic, a federal lawsuit, and a boy named Kalief who should never have been there at all. Stay with this until the end. Because the final chapter of this story is happening right now, and it will change everything. If this kind of investigative documentary content is what you're about, hit subscribe right now and turn on notifications. New episodes drop every day. You don't want to miss what's coming. The city of New York bought Rikers Island in 1884. The price was $180,000. The intention was to build a new penitentiary, a replacement for the overcrowded, crumbling prison on Blackwell's Island, which had become a public embarrassment. Rikers was supposed to be the solution. Modern. Manageable. Out of sight. It didn't open for 50 years. When the first jail facilities officially began operating in the 1930s, the problems began almost immediately. Construction costs ran over budget. There were allegations of corruption. Architects had received no-bid contracts, and city records showed rights parceled out in ways that violated contracting procedures. The buildings themselves had structural issues from the start. Cracks in the foundations documented even before the first inmates arrived. That's how Rikers Island began. Not with a plan. With a scandal. The city kept filling it. By 1969, just 3 decades into operation, the Department of Corrections was holding 14,000 people in spaces designed for 8,000. That is not a small overcrowding problem. That is nearly twice the intended population crammed into the same walls, the same corridors, the same dormitories. The New York Times called Rikers the city's island of the damned. The New York Post ran a headline that asked whether it was a pressure cooker ready to blow. Both publications were right. November 1975. Rioting inmates seized 2 cell blocks at the men's house of detention. 318 detainees are transferred to other buildings. Days later, 350 corrections officers refused to take their posts in a 6-hour walkout. Their demands: address the budget cuts, fix the overcrowding, do something about the violence. The city does not adequately respond. The pressure keeps building. A raging heroin epidemic pushes more arrests. Court backlogs keep accused people on Rikers for longer and longer, waiting for trials that don't come. The population swells. The jail is designed to hold people for weeks or months. But people are now being held for years. Without verdicts. Without convictions. And inside that overcrowded, understaffed pressure cooker, violence becomes the language. According to a 1986 City Board of Correction report, the number of violent incidents in Rikers Adolescent Unit was described as far higher than at any other facility on the island. Officers were writing an average of 19 incident reports per day, every single day, involving stabbings, slashings, and broken bones. On January 12, 1983, a 16-year-old boy was fatally stabbed inside the facility. Between 1983 and 1985, self-inflicted injuries and suicide attempts in the adolescent unit increased by 600%. 600%. The city's response to that report was more beds. More capacity. A physical expansion program. It didn't work. In October 1986, barely months after the report was published, Rikers erupted in what could only be called a 10-day rolling riot across 3 separate buildings. It started in the law library. 30 inmates in a violent altercation. It spread. The state sent an investigative team to the island and declared the situation presented an imminent danger to the health, safety, and security of both inmates and employees. Their April 1987 report blamed the insurrection largely on serious overcrowding and concluded that corrections officers had used unnecessary force on multiple occasions, noting a nearly complete breakdown in command and a failure to maintain discipline among staff. Unnecessary force. Breakdown in command. This was 1987. Here is what you need to understand. The system wasn't broken in 2021. It wasn't broken in 2011. It was broken before most people watching this were born. And the city kept operating it anyway. The worst was still coming. In the late 1980s, the crack epidemic tore through New York City. The consequences were felt everywhere. Crime rates surged. Homicides reached a record 2,245 in 1990 alone. Arrests skyrocketed. And every arrest in New York City feeds one place, Rikers Island. The population exploded. According to city records, at its peak in the early 1990s, nearly 24,000 people were being held on Rikers simultaneously. To put that in perspective, Atticas Correctional Facility, one of the most famous maximum security prisons in the country, holds approximately 2,200 inmates. Rikers, a jail, was holding more than 10 times that number. The city ran out of space. They brought in a barge, the Vernon C. Bain Correctional Center, and docked it in the East River. They erected makeshift tent structures across the island, known as sprungs, which flooded during heavy rains. Inside existing facilities, beds were packed into dormitory areas never designed for that density. A former Rikers mental health employee who worked on the island during these years and later wrote about her experience described the conditions as producing a very turbulent time, with the administration scrambling to fill every available bed at record numbers never seen before or since. Darren Mack, who was sent to Rikers as a teenager during this period and later became the co-director of the criminal justice advocacy group Freedom Agenda, described in an interview, "There was always a constant threat of being harmed by people who were detained or by staff. Staff, particularly because they kind of control Rikers Island through the constant threat of violence. That violence was documented, reported, and largely ignored." August 14, 1990. Officers at the Otis Bantam Correctional Center are pushed past the breaking point. Corrections officers, furious over a labor dispute that had created a bridge blockade, cutting off food deliveries and preventing court transports for days, had been working shifts stretching past 40 hours straight. Minutes after a settlement is reached on the blockade, the facility holding 905 inmates erupts. Inmates erect barricades. They arm themselves. They set fires, flood sleeping areas, smash windows. When the chaos finally ends, 21 corrections personnel are injured and more than 100 inmates are hurt, 81 of them seriously. A Department of Investigation report the following year found that corrections officers had used unnecessary or excessive force during the incident. Most officers and supervisors refused to cooperate with the investigation, choosing, as the DOI report stated, silence to protect those among them who may have violated their duty. Supervisors at every level, the report concluded, had failed to do their jobs. Silence. Cover up. No accountability. The pattern was already fully formed. The 1990s did not bring relief. Strict enforcement policies flooded Rikers with even more bodies. Searches became daily occurrences, and according to former employees and detainees, many of those searches created what one former social worker described as real terror in inmates. Weapons, including firearms, were regularly smuggled in. Inmate-on-inmate violence remained at crisis levels. And the methods used to control the population left scars that outlasted any sentence. But 1990 was also the year a teenage boy named Darren Mack arrived on Rikers. And in 2010, another teenage boy would arrive. His name was Kalief Browder. And his story would eventually force America to look at what was happening on that island, even if it took his death to make them pay attention. May 15, 2010. The Belmont section of the Bronx. Kalief Browder and a friend are walking home from a party. They are stopped by police. A man named Roberto Bautista had called police, claiming someone had stolen his backpack 2 weeks earlier. He identified Browder. Browder was 16 years old. He denied the accusation. His bail was set at $3,000. His family could not afford $3,000. So Kalief Browder was sent to Rikers Island. What happened next is documented in court records, a landmark investigative article published in 2014, a 6-part documentary series produced by Jay-Z in 2017, testimony from Browder himself, and the subsequent $3.3 million wrongful incarceration settlement paid by New York City to his estate. Browder spent 3 years at Rikers, from age 16 to age 19. 2 of those years were spent in solitary confinement. According to documented accounts and court filings, he was beaten by correctional officers. He was attacked by other detainees. He was placed in a cell measuring approximately 8 by 10 feet, isolated for 23 hours a day. During those 3 years, the case was delayed again and again. Prosecutors couldn't locate their key witness. Court dates were adjourned, rescheduled, adjourned again. Browder was repeatedly offered deals: plead guilty, go home. He refused. He maintained his innocence. He attempted suicide twice while incarcerated. In 2013, the charges were dropped. The case was dismissed. Kalief Browder walked off Rikers Island having never been convicted, never been tried, never had his day in court. But the island had not let go of him. Researchers have documented that solitary confinement, especially for adolescents whose brains are still developing, can cause irreparable neurological harm, triggering psychosis, paranoia, and severe depression. After his release, Browder attempted to rebuild his life. He obtained his GED. He enrolled in college. He spoke publicly about what had happened to him. He was quiet, articulate, and clearly still fighting. But the flashbacks wouldn't stop. The paranoia wouldn't quiet. He was hospitalized multiple times. Those who knew him described a young man who had fundamentally changed, who no longer engaged with the world the way he once had. On June 6, 2015, Kalief Browder died by suicide. He was 22 years old. His mother, Vanita Browder, continued fighting for reform after his death. She died in October 2016. Those close to her said the grief and the years of advocacy had taken everything from her. 2 lives gone. Because a teenager couldn't afford $3,000 bail. Kalief Browder's story is not an anomaly. According to data from January 2022, more than 80% of the people held on Rikers had not been convicted of a crime. At that time, 1,498 people had been held pre-trial for more than a year, unable to pay their bail, unable to go home, waiting in a facility that a federal judge would later describe as constitutionally dangerous. The cash bail system, as the ACLU and multiple advocacy groups have argued, functions as a two-tiered justice system. Those who can pay go home. Those who cannot go to Rikers. And on Rikers the wait can destroy you. Browder's case was the spark. But the fire had been burning for decades. And the people responsible for fixing it had known for years, and done nothing. If this video is opening your eyes, share it right now with someone who needs to see this. And subscribe, because what comes next in this story is even more disturbing. In 2011, a teenager named Mark Nunez filed a lawsuit. He was days away from being transferred to a state prison when a corrections captain, according to his filing, brutally beat him without justification. According to the filing, when Nunez questioned being sent to his cell over a pantry rule violation he believed was unfair, the officer called for backup. Officers arrived in riot gear. Nunez says he was maced, punched, and beaten with a radio. The filing was only a few hundred words long. But it rang true for thousands. It became a class action lawsuit, the 5th class action suit alleging a pattern of brutality in New York City jails dating back to 1990. This time it stuck. In 2015, New York City entered into a federal consent judgment, a legally binding agreement signed under court supervision to reform conditions at Rikers. The 76-page order contained more than 300 provisions covering use of force policies, staff discipline, training, video surveillance, officer recruitment, and the safety of teenage detainees. A court-appointed federal monitor was installed to track compliance. It should have been a turning point. It wasn't. In August 2014, even as negotiations toward the consent judgment were underway, U.S. Attorney Preet Bharara issued a scathing federal report condemning what he described as systematic abuse and violation of prisoners' constitutional rights at Rikers. That same month, Bharara released a separate, equally damning report specifically about the treatment of juvenile prisoners on the island. 2 federal reports in 1 month. Documented. Detailed. Publicly filed. And still, the violence continued. Ronald Spear was 52 years old. He was awaiting trial and held in the North Infirmary Command at Rikers because of kidney failure. He walked with a cane. He wore a medical bracelet marked risk of fall. On December 19, 2012, Spear left his dormitory and demanded to see a doctor. A corrections officer became involved in the confrontation when a doctor told Spear he'd have to wait. According to court records and the subsequent criminal trial, the officer punched Spear in the face and body. 2 other officers pinned Spear down. The first officer then kicked Spear multiple times in the head. According to the legal complaint, the officer bent down and told Spear to remember that he was the one who did this to him. When the medical team reached Spear, he was unresponsive. He was pronounced dead. An investigation revealed that the officer and 2 others had conspired to cover up how Spear died, falsifying forms and obstructing justice. In 2016, the officer was convicted on 5 counts, including death resulting from deprivation of rights and conspiracy to obstruct justice. He was sentenced to 30 years in prison. 1 officer convicted. But the culture that produced him, the culture of silence, intimidation, and impunity, remained intact. In June 2012, a detainee named Jason Echevarria swallowed a soap ball, a toxic mixture of cleaning products. According to documented accounts, he begged for medical attention. A captain ordered staff not to assist him. Echevarria died. In December 2014, the captain was convicted of 1 count of denying Echevarria medical care resulting in death and sentenced to 5 years in prison. Echevarria's family was awarded a $3.8 million settlement. 2 officers convicted. 2 settlements. But the Monitor reports kept coming. And they kept saying the same thing: it's not getting better. It's getting worse. By 2021, stabbings and slashings had risen to 39 in a single month of August alone, compared to 7 the previous August. According to federal Monitor reports, 12 detainees died at Rikers in 2021. At least 5 of those deaths were suicides. More people died by suicide on Rikers Island in 2021 than in the prior 5 years combined. The consent judgment had been in effect for 6 years. The city was arguably further from compliance than when it started. May 2023. Inside Rikers Island's intake pen. The intake area is designed to process new arrivals, run their paperwork, assign them housing. Should take hours. Some people were waiting there for days. A man named Daniel Cruz was in that intake pen. According to the Federal Monitor's report and his attorney, Cruz was in the back of a crowded holding area when he was repeatedly assaulted by other detainees. He was brought out of the intake area in visible distress. Then, despite evident injuries, he was placed in another cell and left there for at least 3 hours. Alone. Without adequate medical attention. When he was finally transported to a hospital, he needed to be intubated. He had internal bleeding. Multiple fractured ribs. His spleen had to be removed. In a statement, Cruz said, "They were supposed to protect me, but instead I got jumped and hurt real bad. I was bleeding, in pain, and asking for help, but nobody came. They left me in a cold cell for hours, like I ain't even human." That same year, in a mental health unit on Rikers, a detainee named Rubu Zhao died by suicide. A state commission on correction report cited inadequacies in the psychiatric and mental health care he had received. Also in 2023, Carlton James was brought to Rikers. Body camera footage obtained by journalists showed James followed by a group of corrections officers who took him down in a hallway. He was held on the floor for nearly 5 minutes. He was later taken down a second time, partially off camera. Carlton James says he became a quadriplegic during that encounter. His arms were restrained behind his back when the second takedown occurred. In December 2025, a Federal Monitor report documented an incident in which a detainee who was convulsing while restrained was ignored by 6 officers. A 7th officer then placed pepper spray directly in front of the detainee's face as he lay on the floor. The detainee's wrists were then bent until he screamed. The incident was captured on surveillance footage. All officers involved were suspended. These are not isolated incidents. According to the Legal Aid Society's filings in the ongoing federal case, the levels of violence and use of force incidents in New York City jails in recent years are higher than they were when the consent judgment was signed in 2015. Not the same. Higher. In November 2023, the Legal Aid Society formally called on federal Judge Laura Taylor Swain to order a federal takeover of Rikers, stripping the city of control entirely and handing it to an independent receiver. Their argument was direct. After nearly a decade under court supervision, the city has demonstrated it cannot and will not reform its unconstitutional practices. In November 2024, Judge Swain agreed. She ruled that the current rates of use of force, stabbings, slashings, fights, and in-custody deaths remain extraordinarily high and that there has been no meaningful reduction in the risk of harm facing those who live and work in the jails. She signaled she was prepared to take control of the facility away from the city entirely. As of early 2026, the court is actively considering candidates for an independent remediation manager to take over the Rikers complex. The first time in the history of New York City that a federal court has moved to strip the city of control of its own jails. In 2019, the New York City Council voted to close Rikers Island entirely by 2026 and replace it with 4 smaller, community-based jail facilities across the boroughs. The 2026 deadline has passed. The island is still open. The closures have not happened. Nearly 100 years of violence. Dozens of federal reports. Multiple consent decrees. Millions of dollars in settlements. 2 riots broad enough to require state intervention. Officers convicted of murder and manslaughter. And a 16-year-old boy from the Bronx who never got his trial. Here is the question that no one in power has adequately answered. If everyone has known for decades that this place is what it is, if federal prosecutors, state investigators, city commissions, federal judges, documentary filmmakers, and investigative reporters have all documented it, then why does it still exist? Why is anyone still there? The answer is political. It is financial. It is systemic. But it is also simple. The people inside Rikers Island are, by and large, poor. They are disproportionately Black and Latino. They cannot pay bail. They have no political power. And so the city has always been able to look away. Kalief Browder couldn't look away. He lived it. He documented it. He spoke about it publicly. He died trying to make people understand. His mother died a broken heart away from seeing it change. Rikers Island is still open. The bridge is still the only way in, or out. If this story shook you, if you think this is something more people need to know, share this video right now. Every share reaches someone who hasn't heard this yet. And subscribe if you haven't already. Because if you want to understand how the most dangerous prison gangs in America operate inside facilities just like this one, what happens when the guards lose control and the inmates take over, the next video is already waiting for you. What goes on inside those walls is something you will not believe is real. Click it now.